Hello and welcome to episode 5 of How Are You? I'm Marty Smiley, your host for Pedestrian's newest podcast and video series, talking about all things youth mental health, sponsored by Kids Helpline. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about identity. How often have you ever thought about who you are? What makes you tick? Well, in this episode, we're going to go down the rabbit hole of our personalities and see what we come out with. Before we crack into our interviews, we stopped some pedestrians on the street and asked, what does identity mean to you?
For me, it's identity is more about the person that I am to other people, the way that I treat them.
Who you are to yourself?
I think identity is just who you are as a person. It's not really based on what is your nationality, because we are who we are.
It's kind of strange because it's also how you get looked at and how you look at yourself.
I think Australia, on one hand, gives you the potential to do what you want to do and be who you want to be.
Absolutely, I think. I think they are multicultural, very diverse in this country. So I think it's quite acceptable, to be international people live here, still feel be welcoming.
I think it can do better. I think there's definitely steps being taken to improve that, but I do think more can be done to, I guess, get more acceptance of people from different identities.
Now it is time for the check-in. My guest today is writer and poet Omar Sakr. He's the son of Turkish and Lebanese migrants. He's bisexual. He's Muslim. He came from a working class family and he was raised in Western Sydney. Through this identity and his own writing, he's broadening our idea of what an Arab Australian really is. Welcome, Omar.
Thanks for having me, Habibi.
I remember the first time I got asked a question that is really central to this podcast. I was a teenager. I went along to this thing and the guy who was running it, he looked at me, he said, "Who are you?" And I was like, I'm Marty. And he was like, "No, but who are you really?" I was like, "I don't know, I'm 16. I like having fun. You don't know what makes up your identity. I mean, you don't really know what identity is really as a teenager, I guess." How do you go answering that question? Who are you really?
I don't think that I have necessarily, I mean, certainly I have markers, I guess, they're the markers that are given to me or predominantly, so, being Arab and being Muslim and, coming from Western Sydney, these labels have meanings attached to them, and I guess everyone has to kind of come to some terms with the labels that are attached to the body that they live in. And certainly that's part of my work, right? Making meaning out of those things, out of my body, out of my experiences. But does that mean that is the entirety of who I am? No, I don't think so. There's all kinds of different ways to explore one particular label. I have several, as you noted. I've also got Turkish heritage. I'm also bisexual, and I have mental health difficulties that I've faced as well. And so all of these different things come into play. But as I said, they're starting points. And if you treat it that way, I think it's fine. But if you assume that is the totality of who you are, I think there's a problem.
There's also labels you get told you are, right? So, when this guy's telling me, "Who are you?" What an easier question might have been, who do you get told you are? What label do people put on you? What labels did people put on you when you were younger?
I don't know about labels so much as insults,
Yep.
right? So you'd be called faggot a lot, for example, and all kinds of different derogatory terms for Arabs in particular.
gay slurs,
Yeah, all
Arab slurs.
yeah. Or you'd be called terrorist or something of that nature. So yeah, I think those are just the kind of the stigmas attached to various identities.
When did you first start questioning your own? When do you first have a memory of thinking like, who am I, or what makes me up?
The September 11 attacks in 2001. Yeah, I was 11 and I got a lot of attention that I wasn't used to getting, a lot of negative attention even from my classmates and things like that. And that had a more serious impact in saying like, suddenly there were so many different people telling me, what it meant to be Muslim, what it meant to be Arab, what I was, and making these assumptions about me. And I very quickly had to come up with my own narrative, right? And say, well, you're talking about my family, and this is not true, and defend them. And I think that was a very clear waking up moment.
As an environment, do you think Australia's gotten better, worse, is the same with accepting difference?
Worse. I would say it's worse. I don't think you can look at our policies with refugees and immigration and say that we're better now than we were before. We're aware that it would be cheaper, for example, to process refugee claims in Australia and to do so in a humane way that is in keeping with our laws, or even more broadly, our sense of who we are, our values. But we actually choose willingly to pay more to the tune of billions of dollars to put these people in torturous conditions as a deterrent. That's the official policy of the government. It's deterrence, and it's absolutely horrific. I think the reality is that we're really multicultural, really diverse. We all want to live together. We all have these shared values.
Half the country comes from parents who were born overseas.
Yeah. So the reality on the ground is much different to kind of what we're seeing. Like, but our government, for example,
who has
is
power?
96%, white people, white men predominantly. But on the ground, it's a much different story. So I think there's a struggle between those narratives and those power structures.
How does someone work out who they are? For someone listening who's like, I don't even know where to start. I'm just like, what are actual... It's sort of a difficult question in some ways. Are there like activities? Is there a survey that you can do on yourself?
I mean, I guess you could be
Do
very...
a Myers-Briggs.
You could do a personality test. You could do a family tree. You could try to find out where your family comes from. I definitely encourage that of everybody. For me, I'm a reader. Books were my salvation as a young boy, and so that's played a key role in figuring out kind of what I believe in, and who I am. So I would absolutely encourage people to read books, to read poetry.
Because you might find a character you relate to, or
you
find
might
out a truth about yourself that you didn't know about.
Absolutely.
Do you think relationships are a good way to learn more about yourself?
Like romantic relationships?
Yeah, like love. Does love help you understand more, uncover more about who you are?
That's an interesting question. And I think I've only actually, my current partner, Hannah, I'm deeply in love with her, but this is the first time I've been in love, right? So I didn't actually believe in it before.
Hey,
I thought it was fake. It's amazing. It's amazing. Like, it genuinely is. Like, it's like, it's like,
Mabruk, Habibi. That's great.
So it really is absolutely incredible, and I definitely feel like it's changed who I am.
Sure.
But I haven't figured out necessarily how. I feel like that's the next book that I write. The next book of poems that I write is going to be very much geared toward figuring that out, because that's kind of how I find out what's really going on inside me, right? It's like I just have to go to a blank page and start writing. And then I start figuring out things that I wasn't aware that I was thinking, emotions that I wasn't aware that I was feeling. It's a really, for me, that's the tool that I use.
Belonging is an important thing to identity. It's almost like the home that holds your, your personality. Have you found a place that you belong?
A place?
Or
No.
a being, a state of mind?
Yeah, I think this is where love is kind of central. So I feel like through my relationship with Hannah, now I have a sense of home.
Sure.
Where I didn't really previously. I certainly don't feel at home in Australia, or really any other place in the world. So through her, and also the friendships that I have too. So with my closest friends, who I also love deeply, that's been really important. I feel like I have a home in them, and I hope that they have a home in me, and everything else is kind of not as important when you have that.
You are trying to understand who you are now. Do you have an idea of who you want to be?
As far as who do I want to be kinder, and I want to figure out ways in which I can be there for, firstly, the people in my life, but also otherwise in society. What can I do? And literature, for me, it changed my life, like really and legitimately. And I look at, my cousins and my brother and our network growing up, and the people who were killed, whose lives were kind of crushed in different ways because of how we grew up. And the only thing that separates me from them really is the fact that I started reading books. And so I have this kind of sometimes foolish, but evangelical belief in literature and its power to really change your life. So this is primarily the mode that I'm engaging with, right? Is trying to write and hoping that people who need it will find it, and it can be for them the home that I didn't have.
Well, thank you so much for having a chat.
Yeah, that's all good.
All right, now it is time to talk to our Kids Helpline expert, Josie, in our segment On the Line. Welcome, Josie.
Good to be back.
We're talking about identity. I thought maybe a question I wanted to ask you in this section of the podcast is really like the calls that you get in your over 2 years of experience taking calls from Australia's youth. They must surely have concerns about some of the labels that they're given, names they're called. Is that something that you see come up?
100%. And I think we often don't give a lot of time or thought to the idea of identity, but realistically it affects us every single day in every social interaction, in every relationship that we have. Who we are and what we identify as, who we identify as is going to impact on each of those things. So often young people won't be naming the idea of identity or say, I want to talk about identity, but it comes up as a theme absolutely in calls, like you mentioned, bullying. That impacts identity. Relationships and navigating ideas around self-worth or ideas of, sort of social navigation, 100% identity is a big part of that.
Do you think it's your mission sometimes in these phone calls to make them sort of proud of their difference?
Yeah, I guess if that's something that they're ready to do. Unfortunately, if people are really feeling disempowered or they're feeling targeted, they're feeling victimized, even discriminated against, it can be difficult to get to that point, but that would absolutely be something that we'd love to see. And maybe sometimes it'd be a couple of conversations with us or working with us over a long period of time that would get, that pride or feeling that strength in that identity as well.
Maybe something that you might hear a lot often, I think I told you that I've called the Kids Helpline before, and one of the things that I called them about when I was in year 12 was feeling very lost. That really hits home for that idea of identity, not knowing where you want to go and not knowing if what you're doing in the present is going to help that.
Yeah. Absolutely. That is something we hear a lot about, and particularly as Omar's story brings up, the idea of conflicting parts of identity and not having a lot of clarity as to, does this part of my identity impact on that one, or does this one contradict the other? And it can take a long time to figure out what are the parts of your identity that are meaningful for you and what are the parts that you need to integrate into your life for you to feel like you know what you're navigating and you know what you're up against.
Surely generally people kind of fear change as well, right? So identifying as something that you haven't before would be a really scary
Absolutely.
thing. Whether that means you're identifying as different gender, feeling like you're a different sexuality to the heteronormative kind of ideas that we have about what is you're meant to be. How do you help people with feeling more comfortable with change if that's what they want?
Yeah, it's really encouraging to see that we're getting younger and younger calls and contacts about that. If they're surrounded by people, family members, friends, school environment, social environments that aren't rewarding or even acknowledging what they're saying, then just being able to talk about it and be honest.
Don't accept it.
Yeah, they don't accept it. They maybe don't even want to talk about it, don't even recognize that it exists. And how powerful to be brave enough to talk about who you are and how you feel, and to have it shut down is really, really hard to deal with. So I guess what we often are wanting to do is just say, well, tell us how you feel. Tell us the things that you're weighing up. Totally fine if you're not sure. Let's have the conversation. And we get clearer and clearer the more we talk about things. We get a lot of clarity just from putting things out in the open. So that's often what our primary goal is. And often young people find the answers just by having the time to do that.
Well, if you wanted to find out any more about the topics that we've discussed on today's show, you can head to kidshelpline.com.au, or for any time, any reason, give them a call at 1800 55 1800 or via web chat as well. Tune in next time, because we are going to be picking apart the topic of being busy. Maybe it doesn't even sound like a big topic, but we're talking about when you get so busy you can get burnt out. We're going to unpack it and give you solutions to how to avoid it. See ya. If you do want to hear about all the other podcasts that Pedestrian is doing, they have the Pedestrian Podcast Network. You can get it. You got to subscribe to it on iTunes, YouTube, and Spotify, or where all other podcasts, all the good ones, are found.